We are just seconds away from the first polls closing on this primary night. We'll be closely watching Kansas, which has that referendum on the ballot regarding reproductive rights. Steve Kornacki will be at the big board throughout the night to break down the results in Kansas, as well as primary results in Missouri, Arizona, Michigan, and Washington State. Do not go anywhere. You do not want to miss Steve. The khakis are on. He's ready to party. That is tonight's ReadOut. All with Chris A starts now.
Good evening and welcome to MSNBC Prime. I'm Ali Velshi, and thanks for joining us on this big night in American politics. 5 states are holding primary elections today. The results from each of them will be telling in entirely different ways, and the polls have just closed in Michigan and Kansas. We're, of course, going to have Steve Kornacki here in just a moment to take us through the latest numbers as votes are counted. Now, all eyes are on Kansas today, where abortion rights are on the ballot for the first time since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Kansans are voting on whether to allow the Republican legislature to restrict or ban abortion in the state. Now, we're going to have much more on that vote, including some last-minute dirty tricks and some impressively high turnout numbers. Polls closed just over an hour ago in Missouri, where the marquee race is the Republican primary for the Senate. NBC says it's still too early to call, with just 4% of the polls reporting. 2 of the top contenders for the nomination are Missouri's scandal-plagued former governor Eric Greitens and the current state attorney general Eric Schmitt. 2 guys named Eric. And last night, on the eve of the primary, Donald Trump announced that he was endorsing Eric. Not a joke. Trump endorsed Eric and didn't say which Eric. Could have been Eric Greitens, could have been Eric Schmitt. Could have even been a little-known Eric McElroy, a third Eric who happens to be in the same race. In any case, Greitens and Schmitt immediately claimed that Trump was endorsing him or them. Can't make this stuff up. Meanwhile, polls are still open in the state of Washington, where 2 Republican members of Congress are facing primary challenges over their votes to impeach Donald Trump. Jamie Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse are 2 of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Republican voters in their districts are deciding today whether to toss them out for it. Congresswoman Herrera Butler's primary is also worth keeping an eye on because her Trump-backed challenger has well-documented ties to right-wing extremists and white nationalists. He told an interviewer, quote, "I don't think there's anything wrong with there being a white people special interest group," end quote. And another Republican congressman who voted to impeach Trump is facing a primary challenger backed by the former president today in the state of Michigan, where polls have also just closed. NBC News' Shaq Brewster caught up with Congressman Peter Meyer after he cast his own ballot this morning.
Sure. I mean, I've definitely had some folks who say, listen, I didn't like that vote, but then they also say, I don't want this seat to go to a Democrat.
If you're not successful, what does that say about the future of your party?
I think that'll be a bridge we cross when we come to it. I don't want to get ahead of the poll results, and right now we're feeling very confident with the support that we've been seeing.
Also in Michigan today, the Republican primary to determine who will take on Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer in November. This is a race that has had a weird hiccup a couple of months ago when several of the Republican candidates were disqualified. It turned out that the petitions they submitted to get on the ballot were filled with fraudulent signatures. One of the remaining candidates, Donald Trump, made an endorsement of them a few days ago, getting behind the frontrunner, Tudor Dixon. But it must have been a hard choice because one of the other candidates, Ryan Kelly, was indicted in June for his involvement in the January 6th riots. Must have thought he had a lock on the Trump endorsement after that. But if there's one place that might really give us a sense of the state of the Republican Party tonight, and maybe even the state of American democracy, it's Arizona. Polls close in Arizona in less than an hour, and the Republican primaries there have really been something to see. I mean, Arizona has kind of been the poster child for the GOP's retreat from democracy for a while now. Arizona, you will recall, was one of 7 states that Joe Biden won in 2020, in which the Trump campaign worked with local Republican officials to create fake electoral certificates claiming that, in fact, Trump had won. Just tonight, the New York Times has obtained emails showing that the chair of the Arizona Republican Party raised concerns at the time that the whole scheme might seem, well, quote, treasonous. But then she went ahead and did it anyway. Arizona Republicans then led the charge for calling the 2020 election fraudulent, setting up a months-long circus that they called an election audit, where they shined UV lights at ballots and looked for bamboo fibers to prove that fake ballots were shipped in from China or something like that. At one point, the Republican State Senate tried to have the elected leaders of Arizona's largest county arrested for not sufficiently cooperating with their supposed election investigation. And in a context like that, you're going to get some, let's call them unusual Republican candidates in these midterm primaries, like the Trump-endorsed candidate for governor, who's made the 2020 election the #1 issue of her campaign as governor of Arizona. She says the election was stolen and Joe Biden is not actually the president of the United States. And if she becomes governor, she's going to eliminate mail-in voting as well as all voting machines. Plus, she's been saying for weeks, up to and including today, to our own Vaughn Hilliard on the left of the screen there, that her primary election is already being stolen from her ahead of time. She won't offer any evidence or say how she knows this, of course. Then there's the Republican primary for Senate in Arizona. In that race, Trump's preferred candidate is a guy who is almost entirely funded by the billionaire Peter Thiel, a man who says he does not believe in democracy and that America really started going downhill when women were given the right to vote. Goes without saying that that Senate candidate, Blake Masters, believes the 2020 election was, fill in the blank, stolen. He also says the January 6th attack on the Capitol was a false flag operation, which was actually carried out by the FBI. When it comes to gun violence in America, Blake Masters says he blames, quote, black people, frankly. Then there's the Republican primary for their role in January 6th. Remember, seditious conspiracy is the most serious thing you can be charged with. It's like treason, but you have to be working for the other side in a war for it to be treason. Seditious conspiracy. Guy claims he's a member. Again, the polls close in Arizona in less than an hour. We're going to start to see how these primaries are playing out. But we've got plenty to talk about from the states where we are already getting results. So what does one do on a night like this? It's obvious. We go to the big board for MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, my friend, good evening to you. We are getting results in from Kansas, which is influential on two levels. One, because of the elections that are going on, but two, because they've got a referendum in a primary about abortion. It's the first time in America people are going to the polls after Roe v. Wade has collapsed.
That's right. I think we'll see many more in the years to come. But here it is in Kansas. The proposal is a constitutional amendment that would say that the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not provide for a right to abortion. That would then, if this passes, that would open the door to the legislature enacting a ban if it wanted to, or severe restrictions if it wanted to. It would open the door to that. So what you're seeing here with 11% or so, a little more than 10% of the vote in early, no is off to a good start here in terms of where it's positioned early. I'm just seeing the number. It has come down, and I'm just trying to figure out on the fly here where the vote just came in from that would have done that. But I want to explain the basic trend here that we're looking at. In fact, I think I see it here. This is almost certainly, and I want to just check if my producer can hear me in my ear here, this is where Lawrence, Kansas is. I believe the numbers have been transposed here. Lawrence, Kansas is one of the most. This is one of the more liberal. This is a college town.
That should be where
University of Kansas. And sometimes what will happen is when we get the numbers in, the 87-12 will get flipped. And I suspect strongly that's what happened here. Let me table that for a minute and see if we can get that resolved. Because otherwise, if you get outside of Lawrence, Kansas, the story that is emerging in all of these counties right now is that they are counting up first and reporting out first their vote by mail and their early voting numbers. And as we've seen in election after election, those numbers are the most friendly for Democrats because Democrats just tend to vote by mail. Republicans don't. It's the same day vote, the in-person election day vote, that tends to be much more Republican. And that in Kansas, what's going to happen here is these counties are generally going to report out first the mail vote and the early vote. And what we're seeing is that's probably going to give no its best numbers of the night. And then throughout the night, the counties are going to begin to report out the same-day vote, and that's going to be much more favorable to yes. So I think what we're going to see at the county level is that with these initial reports, almost no matter what county we're looking at, you're going to see no do as good as it's going to do, and then throughout the rest of the night, you're going to see the number come down. You're going to see that happen at the county level, and you're going to see that happen at the state level. So I'm just taking a look at some of these counties right now, and those putting up some enormous numbers in some of these big counties, Democratic counties. I mean, a good example here, Shawnee County. This is where the capital is. This is where Topeka is. You're looking at the mail vote, the early vote here, and no is at 70%. To put that in some perspective, Joe Biden carried this county, but only by 3 points in 2020. A good benchmark here for the no side is they generally want to be running about 10 points better than Biden did. Because Biden got 41% in Kansas in 2020. So generally speaking, if no is running 10 points better than that, it could position no for victory here. So in a county like Shawnee, if the number lands, if the no number lands at the end of the night at about 60% or so, that's probably a good showing for no. But 60 or above is probably a good showing. So the question now is, we've got the mail vote. We've got the early vote. We're going to get the same-day vote in Shawnee County. How far does that no come down? Does it just come down to the mid-60s, low 60s? That would be good for no. Does it come down under 60 to the high 50s, to the mid-50s? That would be good for yes. So that's the story we're going to see in Shawnee County, and that's the story we're going to see in just about all these counties as they light up throughout the night. We have, by the way, so far no numbers from this one. This is the mother of all counties in Kansas, Johnson County, right outside Kansas City. A fifth of the vote, a quarter of the vote statewide is going to come out of here. And again, I expect the pattern I'm describing here is very much going to play out here as well. So, and in fact, there, I believe...
Yeah, you got Lawrence County
okay,
back, yeah.
That issue was resolved.
Yes.
They were transposed. That makes much more sense. This is the home of the University of Kansas. And again, what you're looking at here, this will be the high watermark for no. You would expect no to carry Douglas County, Kansas, but this is the mail-in vote. This is the early vote. There will be some same-day vote that probably is more favorable to yes, so this number will come down here, I expect. But again, that's the pattern we're going to see throughout the night here in Kansas as we get now toward about 20% of the vote counted. Right. No is going to be doing very well here in these early hours. The question is, can no stay above 50 when all is said and done? Just quickly.
And I just want to remind people, you've been saying it, but we're going to have to remind people all night because it's a little counterintuitive. No is to not make it unconstitutional to have abortion health care rights.
Right, yes. This all started because the Supreme Court in Kansas ruled that the state constitution provides for a right to abortion. So what the referendum here is, it's a proposal for a constitutional amendment that would say, actually, the Constitution does not provide for a right to legal abortion in Kansas. So yes would amend the Constitution in the state of Kansas
to restrict abortion.
Right, to say there is no right to abortion. No would not do that.
Steve, you were moving the map there. You were showing us something else.
Yes, let's move over to Missouri. I just wanted to check in on the Senate, that Republican Senate primary. We are starting to get more numbers in there. Next door here, again, Eric Schmidt, the Attorney General here, who was partially, if you want to say, endorsed by Donald Trump at the last minute. The polls had shown Schmidt surging late. There had been a concerted campaign by a lot of Republicans saying Eric Greitens, the former governor who had resigned in scandal, would potentially endanger the seat for Republicans. Schmidt certainly putting up encouraging numbers for his campaign early. And we do have some numbers in Michigan. I do want to just show you this race because this is the right here. This is Peter Meijer, one of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump last year. This is a small amount of voting, but this is his challenger, John Gibbs, backed by Donald Trump. We have votes from one of the three counties that come in, partial votes from Ottawa County, and you can see Meijer down by about 2-1. It's not a ton of votes, but so far, the only other House Republican who voted to impeach Trump, who's then running a primary that Trump's gotten involved in, lost big. So this is a test.
But Meijer has not backed down once. This is a guy who has held to his position. He has not bent to political will or whim. Whether he wins or loses tonight, Peter Meijer will form a piece of history in the next book you write, or anybody who writes about what it was like to be a Republican in the 2020 election and beyond.
Yeah, and there are three up tonight. There are three Republicans who voted to impeach Trump in primaries tonight. None of them have walked away from that vote.
Yep.
And after tonight, there's one more to come. It'll be 2 weeks from tonight in Wyoming, and that'll be Liz Cheney.
Steve, we will stay very close to each other this evening. Thank you, my friend. Steve Kornacki is MSNBC's national political correspondent. We will be checking back with him. Joining us now is Yvonne Wingett-Sanchez. She spent more than 2 decades as a reporter for the Arizona Republic. She's now the Washington Post's very first reporter specifically focused on democracy in America, which is kind of interesting because I feel like, Yvonne, this is the road we're all going into. We're going to have lots of people coming out of journalism schools with the specialty that you practice. But it's important because you've been studying Arizona for so long, and Arizona is, to some degree, ground zero on this experiment to dismantle democracy in America.
Well, we have a full slate of election deniers who are pretty much singularly running on this notion that the 2020 election was stolen. In some instances, they launched their campaigns on the notion that it was stolen. With other candidates, they sort of were playing footsie with the former president in an effort to get an endorsement, which many Republicans deem, key to being able to make it through, especially a crowded primary. And we are seeing competitive and very crowded primaries in a lot of these important races, from the U.S. Senate race to the gubernatorial race and the Secretary of State's race. This is a race that is very important over the next coming years ahead of 2024 and has enormous implications for whatever laws or changes to voting procedures that we may see in the future.
And I want to ask you, because this is your beat, what's the line? What's the distinction between Arizona's got a lot of conservatives. It's got a lot of conservative history. It's got a lot of honest Republicans there. But what is happening in Arizona with some of these candidates who might win tonight is not about being conservative. It's not about being Republican. It's not even about an election being stolen. It's about perpetuating a myth that has been disproved over and over again. Where does that fit in with the democracy watch?
Well, for a lot of Republicans, and I spent last night at a pro-Trump rally in downtown Phoenix. I talked to about a dozen Republicans who were there, and many of them are true believers. They really do believe that something suspicious, something funky happened in 2020, and it cost them big. And there are a lot of people who are newly engaged and are coming out because of this issue. There are others who volunteered or worked at the Arizona ballot review last year, which, by the way, affirmed Biden's win. But they believe in a lot of these conspiracies that have been spread through misinformation, through social media, during conversations with their friends and family members, and they just really, truly believe it. There certainly is another portion of the electorate that is clearly working to exploit this issue and is trying to leverage it to raise money, to get votes, and to just make it through tonight to get to November.
I want to play some tape of MSNBC's or NBC News' Vaughn Hilliard speaking to the Trump-backed Republican candidate. You mentioned the gubernatorial candidate, Kari Lake. I want to get your reaction to it. That's some weird stuff that just went on there. I mean, she entirely made it about Vaughn Hilliard and misrepresenting democracy. Kari Lake is a journalist, or was a journalist, before she was running for this. What happens here? Who are the people who think that sort of thing is mainstream Republican conservative thought and that she's going to get votes from?
There are a lot of people who think she's going to get votes from that. She very well could be on a glide path to winning the nomination, in part because of rhetoric like this. Look, she has, again, singularly campaigned almost exclusively on the notion that Arizona's elections need to be completely upended. And she's talking about eliminating mail-in voting. She is talking about having voter ID on the back of mail-in ballots. A lot of people in the Republican base are hearing from her what they have wanted to hear from the so-called Republican establishment, like Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, like others, for a long time. She has tapped into a base in an extraordinary way, bringing a lot of her experience as a news anchor to connect with these people who feel like they're left behind or that something was taken from them.
It's going to be an interesting night. Yvonne, thank you so much for joining us. Yvonne Wingett-Sanchez covers democracy in Arizona and in America for the Washington Post. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're keeping a close eye on the votes coming in from Kansas tonight, where the no vote on the question of whether to outlaw abortion is currently running ahead of the yes vote. Still early, though. A lot of those no votes are mail-in and absentee. We're going to talk live with one of the activists leading the fight. We're checking with Steve Kornacki again.
The Justice Department is going to use every tool we have to ensure reproductive freedom. We're going to enforce federal law here.
All right, 2 weeks ago, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, promised to use the full weight of the federal government to use every tool they have to uphold federal law that requires hospitals that receive Medicare funding to provide medically necessary treatment to emergency room patients. Sounds pretty simple, but that includes some abortions. Some people have to get an abortion at an emergency room because of some related matter that's either related to their pregnancy or otherwise. Garland threatened to sue states that violated that federal law, and today he did it. The Justice Department sued Idaho over the state's restrictive trigger law, which is set to go into effect on August the 25th. The DOJ claims that the law violates the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. Garland's Justice Department is seeking an injunction against the state of Idaho to block it from enforcing its abortion ban. Now, this is a very big deal. It's the first lawsuit that the Justice Department has brought against a state over abortion restrictions since the Supreme Court overturned Roe. And according to Garland and his Associate Attorney General, Vanita Gupta, this is unlikely to be the last time they do it.
We will use every tool at our disposal to ensure that pregnant women get the emergency medical treatment to which they are entitled under federal law. And we will closely scrutinize state abortion laws to ensure that they comply with federal law.
We know that these are frightening and uncertain times for pregnant women and their providers. And the Justice Department, through the work of its task force, is committed to doing everything we can to ensure continued lawful access to reproductive services.
Now, both the Attorney General and the Associate Attorney General echoed a point that Garland made on Friday during a White House meeting with bar associations, public interest groups, and law professionals. He said, quote, "It will take all of us, government lawyers, private pro bono attorneys, bar associations, public interest organizations, to do all we can to protect access to reproductive health care and to provide vigorous legal representation of patients, providers, and third parties in need," end quote. So today, it is Kansas voters' turn to protect access to reproductive health care in their state. Voters there have cast their ballots in the first referendum on abortion anywhere in the country since Roe was overturned. Now, as it stands now, Kansas courts say that the right to an abortion is protected in the state constitution. But if a majority of voters vote yes to an amendment that would explicitly remove that right, the Republican state legislature could pass future laws restricting abortion. So there is a lot riding on this vote tonight. It's not a primary. This happening during the state's primaries rather than during the general election in November, where more voters would typically turn out. But this is actually a referendum. Several voters have complained that the language in the ballot measure is confusing. And just last night, voters received several misleading texts with language that added to the confusion. Things like, quote, "Women in Kansas are losing their choice on reproductive rights. Voting yes on the amendment will give women a choice. Vote yes to protect women's health," end quote. This is what, where I was growing up in Canada, we would call a lie. Because voting yes today actually means removing the right to choice over an abortion from the state's constitution. Yes is no abortions. No is protecting abortion rights. Despite all the confusion and the fact that this is just a primary election day, Kansas saw a surge in early voting compared to 2018, indicating very strong interest in this referendum vote. We're seeing even more early reports of strong turnout today. We know that recent polls show the yes votes, meaning the votes to ban abortion in the state, have a slight edge. But considering the turnout today, it's anyone's guess where this lands. Polls closed in that state right as we came on air tonight. Joining us now is Sapphire Garcia-Lies, abortion rights supporter working on the Vote No campaign in Kansas. Sapphire, good to see you. Thank you for joining us again tonight.
Thank you, Allie.
It's early yet. We're seeing early returns, which tend to be mail-in returns, and some coming from the cities where we sort of expect the results to be what they are. About 22% of the numbers are in the states. We're seeing a no lead at the moment, which is fairly significant, but analysts are expecting that to flatten out as the night goes on. What are you expecting to happen?
I think that we've done this. I think that Kansas has turned this around. I am seeing lines around the corner at all the polls today. And I'm hearing from Republicans and Democrats alike that this was not going to be good for Kansas. And I think we've done it. I am optimistic that we have stopped this in its tracks.
We know that there are several tactics that could result in stifling the Vote No initiative tonight. The language on the ballot measure is confusing. That text that I just described, I saw that somebody sent that to me to say, well, that makes it look like if you want women to have reproductive rights, vote yes, which would actually have the opposite effect. Tell me what's happening with that and whether there's anything to be done about it.
You know, I think that people are so galvanized in their beliefs and their position on this that one text message was not going to sway their opinion. I've also heard, Allie, that at some of the polling places in Wichita, there were poll worker impersonators passing out handouts that gave people the idea that if they had a felony, they shouldn't vote. We know that that's not the case in Kansas. If they are no longer under supervision for that felony, they are allowed to exercise their right. And people are pushing back. I think that's what we're seeing widespread here in Kansas. People are tired of the status quo. They are tired of freedoms being snatched away, and they're pushing back and showing today that Kansas is more radical than people think.
Several states surrounding Kansas have recently imposed abortion bans. The Kansas Department of Health says abortions have increased in Kansas by more than 13% in the past 2 years. Now, are you worried about what happens next for pregnant people all over this region if there's success in this amendment for the yes side?
Yes, I am extremely worried. Kansas is an island of access right now. And if we lose access in Kansas, of course, all the surrounding states lose access. And not everybody has the financial means to jump on a plane and go to Chicago or Denver. And so we're going to see this impact Black and brown mothers more than anybody else. And as somebody who specifically serves Black and brown mothers all through this state, it concerns me. I'm tired of seeing my sisters die, and it has to come to a stop. I think Kansans, by and large, agree with that.
Well, we're going to see this all play out tonight. Sapphire, thanks for joining us again tonight. Sapphire Garcia-Lies is an abortion rights supporting worker on the Vote No campaign in Kansas. We appreciate seeing you again. We got new numbers, by the way, coming in by the minute in Kansas and in Michigan. Polls that closed at the top of the hour. We're going to get to the latest results in those two states with Steve Kornacki. But just let me show you what's happening in Kansas right now. Just in the course of the conversation that I've had, another percentage point has come into that state, and the no vote has increased. So we've now got 63% on the no side. This is no to restricting abortion in the state, 37% on yes to imposing abortion restrictions in Kansas. We'll have more with Steve on the other side. As I mentioned before the break, we're getting a lot of numbers in from Kansas, but you can't just take these raw numbers and make something of them. We got Steve Kornacki for that. Steve, literally as we talk, we get more and more numbers in. You're trying to make sense of it and determine trends. I just spoke to somebody who's part of the No campaign who said they think they've got a lock on this tonight. What are you making of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, No is putting up monster numbers early in this thing, exactly the kind of numbers they wanted to be putting up. The one catch on this, as we've been saying, is what you're generally really looking at so far here on this map is that mail vote, the vote by mail, and the early vote. And what you're generally waiting on is the same-day vote. And we just find that the early vote, the vote by mail in particular, is a heavily Democratic type of vote. So the rule of thumb in any of these counties that are not at 100% completed is you're looking at the high water mark for no, then the same-day vote is going to come in and be counted, and that's going to boost yes. And the question is going to be, does no start to tick down, and fall, near or under 50%? So
and no are the folks who want to preserve abortion rights in Kansas. The courts have said that abortion is protected in the state constitution. Yes are the people who want to change that so that abortion rights are not protected in the Constitution. Now, you've been making some interesting comparisons all evening where you say you want to compare the no and the yes. So let's call this similar to Democratic votes and similar to Republican votes in an election. And you're trying to compare that to what happened in the last election.
Yeah, exactly. So one way of interpreting this is, as I was saying, we've got that early mail vote in a lot of these counties. What we're missing in a lot of them is the same day. Here's one county. It's a very small county, but I think this is interesting. This is Phillips County. The population here is about 4,500, okay? But we've got, we think, all the vote, or just about all the vote in Phillips County. So here's a place where we got the mail, this early, okay.
And your view of this is that, well, the no group didn't do very well in this rural.
You would look at this and say, hey, yes, the 2-to-1 victory. Now let's put that in perspective. In this county, in the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump won 87 to 11%. And remember, statewide, Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election got 41% of the vote in Kansas. So one rule of thumb where you can get all the votes counted up in any given county of the state is, hey, if Biden's running about, if the no side is running about 10 points better than Biden, that's going to bode very well for the no side. Well, you see it. Biden got 11% in this rural, heavily Republican county in 2020, and no tonight has tripled that, gets 33%. So the benchmark for no in a county like this would probably have been about 20%. Looks like they're going to get 33% here. So this is the second piece of the equation. If you start seeing this as other counties get all their votes counted in, if you start seeing anything even remotely resembling this, then your guest who said no was on their way to victory is absolutely right, because that's what has to happen for no to prevail tonight. And you're looking, again, this is one very small county
and you're using it as an example because we got a lot of vote in this county.
Exactly, because we've got that mix that we're talking about, where you've got the mail, you've got the early, you've got the same day. Now you've got something that you can compare to a past election result. And again, using that 2020 result, that Biden-Trump vote kind of as a benchmark here and saying, here, no has to build off that Biden number. Well, here, they much more than built off it in Phillips County there. So, again, we'll see here as we get completed results in other counties. And the other thing I wanted to point out is right here, Johnson County, this is the granddaddy of them all. About 20 to 25% of all the votes in the state of Kansas are going to come out of this county. This is the suburbs of Kansas City. Exactly. We haven't gotten anything yet. But again, Biden carried this county. Just again, keep it in mind. Biden carried this county with 53% of the vote in 2020. This has moved dramatically in the Democrats' direction over the last decade or two. And again, if the no side were to finish, 65% or something here, I mean, that could be ball game. So, but we don't have any of the numbers from Johnson County.
Something just popped in on Johnson.
Okay.
So something's interesting because it went from nothing to
90,
95%.
And what I suspect, this is what I suspect here, and I'm just going to see if my producer can confirm this. Adam, is this? Do we suspect that we've got the mail and the early, and we're still waiting on same day?
Okay.
Right. So what's happened? One of the things that's happened here, Allie, is turnout is so high in Kansas today, so unexpectedly high. I can tell you, we're now estimating that the turnout in this primary is going to be about 800,000. The typical turnout in a primary in Kansas is about 450,000. So it's that much higher. And so what's happened here is what just happened in Johnson was we had an estimate at the start of the day of what we thought the total vote would be.
And we're almost at that number.
It just hit that level.
But there's going to be
more.
Many more
This
votes.
this is a good example. This is a very good example.
But we're still outpacing. No is still outpacing at the moment what Biden got in 2020.
This is what I've been describing in all these other counties. What you've got here is the early vote and the mail vote. This is as good as it's going to get for no in Johnson County. But Johnson County, if you, again, call that up on the screen,
look at that,
was only 53% Biden. So if you use that rule
63%, no would be doing very
62,
well.
63, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's got to come down a lot for no to have a bad night.
Let me ask Corey, do we have time to talk about Michigan real fast? Because I think we've had some calls in Michigan. Let's take a look at Michigan.
Yeah. Let's go to the national. This race, by the way, this is the Republican primary for governor.
Gretchen Whitmer is going to be
the Democratic nominee. And this race, we'll see if this develops into a competitive general election campaign. The initial Republican frontrunner was disqualified. Several Republican candidates, in fact, were disqualified from the ballot because of signature issues. So this primary turned into an absolute mess. This ends up being a Trump-endorsed candidate who wins it. Also, by the way, Betsy DeVos endorsed candidate who wins this primary. We'll see if she's able to make this a competitive general election. Not a surprise that it ends this way tonight. This is what the polling was suggesting. But yeah, the other the big piece of suspense in Michigan is right here. 3rd Congressional District, Western Michigan. And now look at this. We've got close to a third of the vote in here. What you're looking at is John Gibbs, who's challenging Peter Meijer. Peter Meijer, one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. When we looked at this last, Gibbs' lead was getting close to 20 points. It's now down, as you can see, to about 4.5 points. And what's happening, this is interesting. Let's just zoom in here. Ottawa County, you can see this is a smaller part of the district. Gibbs running up a score there. This is the bigger part of the district, Kent County. This is where Grand Rapids is. This is Peter Meijer's base. It's not a lot of the vote that's in from Kent County. There's going to be a lot more votes to come here. So there's a big question mark here. Is it going to stay this Meijer friendly? But if the vote does stay this Meijer friendly in Kent County, he could rack up a lot. The other piece of it is the Muskegon County. A bit of Muskegon County is also in this district, too. That's also new turf for Meijer. So I think what Meyer's got to do is just run up the score in Kent. We see just a bit more coming in here. He's got to run up the score in Kent because he's got to offset where probably going to be losses in those other 2 counties. But it's interesting. Oh, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. I wanted to reset on it. Yeah, I mean, look at that. Really now.
It's narrowing now.
Meyer's in the game
every minute. And he's been saying that all day. He's been feeling and sounding pretty confident. And the reason people need to be interested in this story is that whatever happens to Peter Meijer, win or lose, this is a big American story now. This is a guy, a Republican, who said, I'm going to vote to impeach Donald Trump. And now we watch to see what happens to his future.
He would be the first. Again, a lot of the Republicans who voted to impeach Trump just decided not to run this year. One did get through a primary. That was David Valadao in California. But Trump didn't get involved in that primary. He didn't endorse anybody, stayed away. Valadao just got through. Meijer would be the first. And again, we got 2 others in Washington State we'll look for later. But Meijer, if he could win this, would be the first to have Trump come in, endorse an opponent, and survive. That's a huge if. He's getting some encouraging numbers from his base in Kent County. Kent County is the biggest part of this district, but he's still losing in Ottawa. Still, I think, maybe in for some trouble in Muskegon County. So we'll see. This is an interesting race to keep an eye on.
You and I are going to be spending a lot of time next to each other this evening. My friend, thank you. Steve Kornacki is staying with us. We're going to keep a very close eye on Kansas and other results as they come in. We got much more ahead on this election night. Stay with us. All right, we're keeping a very close eye on election results tonight, particularly on Kansas, where early results show a referendum to get rid of a state constitutional protection on abortion is set to fail. We want to get now look again. We got 41% of the numbers in right now, but it's running 2-1 for the group who want to protect abortion rights in Kansas. That is the No campaign. We're going to be making a lot of references to no and yes. The clock is ticking, by the way, on another big story for the Senate to pass a slimmed down but still massive version of President Biden's agenda that was dealing with health care, climate, and taxes. You'll remember that deal broke down in the past. It was brokered, this new one, by Democratic Senate Leader Chuck Schumer and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Manchin's support means the party's now closer than ever to passing an economic package which is focused on climate and health care, which would be major victories for Democrats. But the Senate goes into recess next week, and we do not know if Manchin's colleague Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema is on board with this. This afternoon, the two conservative Democrats were seen together on the Senate floor, and my colleague Stephanie Ruhle spoke to Senator Joe Manchin late this afternoon about the deal and whether he was able to convince Sinema and Republican senators to support it. Manchin began by telling her that all of the Republican senators across the aisle are his friends, which then led to this exchange. My old friend and partner, Stephanie Ruhle, host of the 11th Hour, who interviewed Senator Joe Manchin today. First of all, hi, buddy. Good to see you.
I'd like to point out, I always call you my dear friend. You always call me your old friend, and that's noted.
Okay, we're going to change it tonight, my dear friend.
Just want to make that point.
Joe Manchin, tough to pin down on this stuff, but you were trying. He's got friends.
Was.
He says they're friends all over the Senate, but you're asking him, does that friendship convert into votes?
Well, listen, he is talking to his friend, Kyrsten Sinema. He did speak to her today, and he said something interesting. He said, we're sending papers back and forth. What it sounded like she really wants to know more about is the permitting access he's asking for in West Virginia, which is really some pork for his state, some stuff that just West Virginians want because he wants to go home and give them that. So maybe he's hinting that she's going to be asking for something special for the state of Arizona. He very clearly didn't say she was a no, but he didn't say she was a yes, and he sure is out there running victory laps.
But it'd be a big deal if he gets it.
Sure would.
All right, let's talk about something that you and I talked about a lot. We asked conservative after Republican about the carried interest loophole and getting rid of it. Lots of people assured us they'd get rid of it, and then the Trump tax bill was done, and they didn't get rid of it. Now there's an opportunity to do something with it. Carried interest is what very rich people, it's how they make their money.
Okay, so basically, everybody likes to tune out of carried interest because it's so boring, but I'm begging people to pay attention because it's basically how the private equity industry gets paid on performance fees. And basically, they pay a whole lot less taxes
than people who earn a
else.
salary for working.
Correct. And the reason this is so egregious and offensive, when we talk about private equity executives, we're not even talking Fortune 500 CEOs and the millions of dollars they get paid. We're talking about people that get paid hundreds of millions of dollars who are quietly huge donors to lawmakers. Nobody likes carried interest except them, yet miraculously, it always stays in the tax code. You and I have asked endlessly, Republican lawmakers, when are you going to finally close this loophole? But now, if Kyrsten Sinema doesn't go for it, Democrats are going to be the ones with egg on their face. They're going to be the ones that didn't close it.
Someone needs to take this opportunity to get rid of that once and for all. They're never letting me do the show again because you and I come on and we start geeking out over finance stuff.
Everyone is invited to come on your or my show any day to defend why this thing should stay in
100%.
And they never
do. The door is open. Thanks, buddy. My dear friend, Stephanie Ruhle.
Not old.
Host of the 11th Hour. She's going to have a full interview with Joe Manchin tonight. More election results ahead. We're going to come right back. It does it for us tonight. I'm going to see you again at midnight, along with Steve Kornacki, who's not going home tonight, for a special live hour of the latest election results. Time now for the last word. Zerlina Maxwell in for Lawrence tonight. Good evening, my friend.
Thank you so much, Ali. It's great to see you. Thank you again for the toss. It's primary night in America, everybody, and in Arizona, Kansas, Michigan, Missouri, and in Washington. Polls just closed in Arizona with 3 Trump-endorsed election deniers on the ballot. But the big story tonight is Kansas. Voter turnout is high, and right now, the pro-choice no vote to keep the right to an abortion in the Kansas Constitution is leading, which would be huge, really gigantic, in terms of a victory in the very red state. Let's get right to the big board and Steve Kornacki for the latest. Steve, what is happening there on the ground? This seems like a surprise. Is it given the polling going in? Take us through what we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, look, there wasn't too much polling coming in. The one poll that came out a couple weeks ago showed this very close, actually. It showed yes leading 47 to 43. What's happening here, there's a couple things. Generally, what you're seeing, first of all, you're seeing massive turnout. You know, we think now about 800,000 people, maybe more, are going to end up voting in this primary. Typically, in a Kansas primary, you're looking at about 400, 450,000, something in that neighborhood. So a massive spike of turnout that was generated clearly by this referendum. Some of the big, highly populated counties, let's start with the biggest in the state. This is Johnson County. This is the suburbs of Kansas City. What they've reported out here is basically their early vote, their vote by mail. The no side here racking up 72% with this. Now, the early vote, the vote by mail, it's the most friendly to Democrats generally. We assume it's the most friendly to the no vote. But, I mean, just you could see here, Johnson County, again, this is by far the biggest county in the state. Joe Biden won it with 53% of the vote in 2020. The no side wanted to get up into the low 60s in this county. I think with the rest of the vote to come in here, which will be the same-day vote. It'll be the vote that was cast today. That tends to be the most Republican-friendly. Yes will tick up. No will tick down, but it's hard to see no ticking down far enough. It's hard to see no ticking down below, let's say, the mid to low 60s. So no is getting the kind of huge, gigantic, enormous early numbers that that side wanted to get. And we're seeing that in Johnson County. We're seeing that in county after county in the state. What we've been waiting for here is, like I said, in Johnson County, across the state, you get that early vote. Then the same-day vote comes in. The same-day vote's going to be more Republican, more conservative, presumably more supportive of yes. So you do expect to see these numbers tighten somewhat. But we're looking here for counties where we basically have all the vote. And there are a few now where that's the case. We basically, here's an example, have all the vote in Franklin County. So it's not a huge county, but I think this could be telling. Joe Biden got, you can see right here, in 2020, Joe Biden got 29.6% of the vote in Franklin County, okay? Now, Joe Biden statewide in Kansas in 2020 got 41% of the vote. So if you do the math, a benchmark for the no side is they want to do about 9 points better than Joe Biden did, right? If Biden got 41, does 9 points better, that would be 50%. So in any given county, is no doing 9 points better than Biden when all is said and done? Well, Biden got 29.6% in Franklin County, and no, there's only a couple precincts left, is almost doubling that. So that's the kind of shift here. That's much more than the kind of shift that the no side was hoping to see in this referendum. There are some other counties, small counties, you know, getting out to western Kansas here, Meade County. This is a deeply Republican county here. Joe Biden only got 14% of the vote. Just about all the vote is counted up in Meade County. And again, you say the no side wants to run about 9 points better than Biden did. It's running 17 points better than Biden did in this deeply Republican rural county. So we're starting to see counties here with the complete vote or almost the complete vote in. And what we're seeing is that no is basically hitting the benchmarks that it needs to hit and then even blowing past them. So while we don't have the full vote in from these gigantic, enormous counties that really will decide elections in Kansas, no is putting up the numbers it wants to early there. And in the places where the vote is complete, no is meeting and exceeding its benchmarks. So I think, again, we just checked back in with the statewide vote there. 29, almost 30-point margin for no, almost getting close to half the vote in statewide. You know, what we want to see, what we're looking for here in terms of a declaration on this race is some of these bigger counties to get all of that same-day vote counted in. But if you start seeing in these bigger counties what you're seeing, and I just showed you in these smaller counties, that's going to be a victory for no.
It's so fascinating to see all of this laid out, Steve. In terms of that extra that the no side is getting, is that Republicans? Do we know who is creating this boost for the no vote here?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be in a county like Meade County. Again, it almost has to be. Donald Trump got, 84% of the vote here in 2020. Joe Biden, 14.4%. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the makeup of the electorate is in any one of these given counties, but I think when you start seeing a place like this, that the no number exceed the Biden number that much, that's not just a question of, hey, the Democrats showed up there, the Republicans did. I think that's showing you that in a place like Meade, there are some Republicans, Trump voting Republicans, who voted no on this. There's probably a good number of them. And again, that will be the case, I think, too. If Johnson County, when all is said and done, this is a county that went for Biden with 53%. If no is ending up in the 60s here, then I think there was some crossover, too. And Johnson County, by the way, this is one, when this all comes in, Johnson is, I think, one we're going to be talking about beyond tonight. Because Johnson County, I think, in many ways is representative of a type of county that you see in a lot of places around the country. It's going to be key to a lot of races this fall. Johnson County is a big, populous suburban county right outside Kansas City. It has been trending. I could just show you the political trend in Johnson County. I mean, look at this. It went for Mitt Romney by almost 20 points back in 2012. It was competitive in 2016, and then it flipped to the Democrats by almost 9 points in 2020 for Joe Biden. This is the kind of electorate. There's a lot of college-educated voters here, suburbanites. This is the kind of electorate that has shifted towards the Democrats, had a negative reaction to Trump, tends to be more moderate, even liberal on social and cultural issues. This is the kind of place the Democrats said, hey, this Supreme Court ruling on abortion is going to take voters in a place like this, and it's going to activate them. It's going to energize them. Democrats say it's going to potentially bring them out to vote Democratic in November. Now, this is a referendum on abortion. This is not a Democrat-Republican race per se, but you're certainly seeing in these early numbers here in Johnson, you're seeing the kind of energy Democrats were predicting that this Supreme Court ruling would set off. And if that energy is visible in other counties like Johnson across the country, big suburban counties, places like the suburbs of Philadelphia, the suburbs of Atlanta, suburbs in states that have Phoenix, that have crucial elections this November. If that can attach itself to Democrats and their candidates in November, that's what Democrats have been saying the Supreme Court ruling would do. You're certainly seeing in these numbers, the turnout numbers and these early voting numbers here, you're certainly seeing the kind of energy around this issue that Democrats said would be there.
Steve, that is such an amazing piece of the story that I think we should keep an eye on as these results continue to come in, because this was the very first time since the Roe decision that abortion was on a ballot. And so it's so interesting to see that uptick in turnout. We'll be back with you for more results out in Arizona. But thank you so much for that helpful breakdown. For more on the Kansas abortion referendum, let's go to NBC senior national correspondent Chris Jansing, who's down in Kansas City. Chris, you've been talking to voters. Are these numbers a surprise to you?
I think all day long, the people I've been talking to have been saying the numbers are huge, the lines are long, but we just got an update, Zerlina, from the Secretary of State, and these numbers are off the charts. He said they may end up rivaling the Obama presidential election in 2008. And so many people were still standing in line as the polls were closing, something, believe me, you never see this time of year. It was a hot August day. So many people standing in line that the Secretary of State actually tweeted, don't leave the line. If you're standing in line, you still get to vote. This is an extraordinary turnout by any measure, and there are several reasons probably why. It is indeed tied to this abortion question. The day after Roe, registrations in Kansas went up 1,000%, a very early indication that people were going to be motivated by this issue. And then you frankly couldn't get away from it. $12 million were spent in TV ads alone, about $6 million on each side in a state where there are fewer than 2 million voters. And even if you didn't have a television, literally hundreds of thousands of door knocks by, again, people on both sides of this issue. One organization told me they did 250 houses, just that one group. So you absolutely couldn't get away from it. But I think one of the big pictures that's going to emerge from this is going to be unaffiliated voters. There are more unaffiliated in Kansas than there are Democrats, but they have been growing while the number of Republicans have actually been going down. And unaffiliated voters almost never turn out for a primary because they can't vote in Kansas for candidates. They can only vote on issues. But because this issue was getting so much attention, because it was so highly motivating, we believe we will see huge numbers of unaffiliated voters, many of them who newly registered came out for this. You know, there was a question here about exactly why would you have such an important issue in the dead of summer? And if you talk to folks who support abortion rights, they said they were trying to bury it. They thought if they could put it on the ballot in August, they could push it through because not many people would turn out. We don't know what the results are yet, Zerlina, but we do know the turnout was exceeding everyone's expectations.
Such interesting analysis of unaffiliated voters. Were there any crossover voters? We mentioned in the breakdown with Steve Kornacki, it looks like there may be some Republican voters here coming in and voting no. Did you speak to any today on the ground?
Yeah, I haven't spoken to any who have voted no, but I will tell you this. Talking to, again, I spent a good bit of this afternoon talking to organizers on both sides of this issue, and they really didn't know where this was going. And I think one of the big reasons is, again, when you see this shift since 2021, the number of unaffiliated voters going up, the number of Republicans going down. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still a heavily Republican state, but it shows you that there was already some movement, and then you have this huge issue that's blowing up and you can't get away from it. And I think, you know, I'll leave that to Steve also to, you know, sort of dissect where that vote comes out. But I don't think that there was any doubt in the minds of folks who were on the side of abortion rights that they were seeing a lot of, particularly, they said, mothers who would say to them, and there were people who said this at the polls, I want to protect the rights of my daughters. And so this was something that they were seeing over and over and over again as they were talking to people as they were coming out of the polls. Zerlina.
Chris Jensen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please stay safe. Joining us now is Emily Wales, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Great Plains. So Emily, how are you feeling right now with the turnout being so high and the vote so far?
I just stepped out of the watch party, actually, and there is an incredible amount of excitement and energy and engagement. We knew that this would be a remarkable moment. We knew that Kansans were registering in higher numbers than ever before. But to see this play out right now and to hear that Kansans believe what we do at Planned Parenthood, that you should trust patients to make their own medical decisions is really rewarding, especially during this dark time in the country when other people are being stripped of their rights. Kansans have pushed back and said, not here.
As Chris mentioned, this election and referendum comes in the middle of summer. But there was also one other problem today, and that was just confusion over the language of the actual referendum. And Dasha Burns from NBC spoke to voters on the ground about this exact thing.
I found it very complicated to try and figure out. We spent a lot of time doing a little bit of research and trying to understand what the amendment actually meant and how it meant, what it meant for our family and our family values. And we tried to make sure that we were voting correctly for women's rights.
It's pretty hard because they don't make it easy. And that's because whoever side it writes it right that way, I think. But it was hard. I wish they would use simple language. I understand they have to use language that can be legal, you know, but for me, it's hard to understand.
So interesting to see voters there, one a yes vote, one a no vote, both confused about the language. Do you think there was enough awareness going in? Do you think it being in the summer was part of the strategy to, lose people's attention? And do you hope that perhaps the results tonight can bring even more people to this moment and fight to protect bodily autonomy going forward?
Absolutely. The conservative legislature in Kansas was able to choose when to put it on the ballot. And this question is on an August primary for a reason. Kansas Democrats and independents generally don't have competitive primaries. And so I believe there was an attempt to really suppress voters, to have a small group of Kansans make this decision. And instead, Kansans registered, they showed up. Some people are only voting on this constitutional question because they're not registered with a party. But that just shows how deeply held Kansans' faith in their colleagues, their neighbors, their family and friends really is. I think people are going to be engaged across the region because Kansas had this unique opportunity. It could look across state lines to Kansas or Oklahoma, Arkansas, and see what the crisis looks like, where we've lost abortion access, where we have conversations about whether emergency contraception is legal, whether doctors can intervene in medical emergencies. And instead of letting that fate happen here in Kansas, they are stepping up and fighting back. And I hope it really does inspire other states that are struggling in this moment to protect care for individuals.
In the weeks since the Dobbs decision, there have been so many reports of unintended consequences, people who are unable to get care for ectopic pregnancies or miscarriages. There was a woman in Texas who walked around for weeks with her dead fetus inside of her body because the doctor would not perform the DNC for her. Can you talk about those unintended consequences and how that is resonating in the minds of voters, including the ones that are going out today in an off-calendar, off-your-election midterm year, to make their voices heard on this specific issue?
There have been some really public, heartbreaking stories about what it looks like when you lose access to comprehensive care in large parts of the country. And what we've seen in Kansas is that this is personal. And during this campaign, again and again, Kansans would talk to us, and they would also talk to their friends and family about voting in this election because abortion had somehow touched their lives, or they had needed care and not felt comfortable saying it before. In this moment, when we are at a historic point of losing access to rights, of going backwards when it comes to human rights, people are talking openly about care they felt they could not before. And that has been hugely empowering. And I think you're seeing that play out here in Kansas.
Emily Wales, thank you so much for being here tonight, and please stay safe. We'll have more on the Kansas abortion referendum all throughout the course of this hour, but coming up, we're going to turn to the state of Arizona, where polls just closed and where Donald Trump has been propping up a slate of Republican election deniers. Reginald Boulding, who's running for Secretary of State in Arizona, will join us next. Welcome back to Primary Night in America. And Steve, I heard you have more on what's going on the ground in Kansas. What's happening?
You can see here in this referendum, now we're up to about 60% of the vote in the no side, continuing to sit here at 63%, well over 60%. And I think now we're starting to get some more definitive answers here. We've been saying all night that the question in a lot of these counties was you'd have that early vote come in, that mail vote come in. It would be the high water mark for no. Then the question would be, when you get the same day vote, how much does the no vote come down? Well, one of the counties, I think the county we started the night looking at, if anybody has been watching all night, is Shawnee County. This is where the state capital is. This is where Topeka is. And at the start of the night, we got the early vote in from Shawnee, and no was running at 70%. And we said, well, that would come down as the night went on and the same-day vote was counted. Well, the same-day vote is basically all counted now in Shawnee County. And you see it did come down, but it only came down to 66%. And that is well beyond any benchmark that no would have needed to hit in a county like Shawnee County. This is a pretty big one. Again, Topeka, where the state capital is. To just give you a sense of it, Joe Biden got 50% of the vote in this county in 2020. And we've been saying all night, Biden got 50% here. He got 41% statewide, meaning that basically the no side needs to be running about 9 points better than Biden did in any given county. Well, did they? Biden got 50 and no gets 66 in Shawnee. They go 16 points better than Biden. So now we're seeing this pattern here. We showed you some small counties where this has happened. Here's a much bigger county where it's happened, where the no side has met and I'd say vastly surpassed the benchmark it needed. So you're starting to see these numbers. I think they're starting to cement here statewide again, as we just check back in, about 60% of the vote in here, and no is still holding over 60%. There's movement we just saw there in Shawnee in the same day vote toward yes, but not nearly the kind of movement that the yes side needs to reverse this kind of a gap here. So no is in very good shape. You can see here with 60% of the vote coming in. When you get a completed county that size, I think it really tells you that. And just very quickly wanted to mention, too, in Michigan, that congressional primary, Peter Meyer, the Republican who voted to impeach Trump, we got about a third of the vote in there right now. That race is dead even.
Also fascinating, Steve. And again, I love it because in American democracy, you can't make any predictions because voters vote. They decide what happens. Thank you so much for that breakdown and update. We'll be back to you for more results later on in the hour. We're watching the results coming in from the state of Arizona right now that will test just how extreme the Republican Party has truly become. Donald Trump's endorsed election denier candidates could potentially clinch the nominations in 3 important races. Carrie Lake, who Trump endorsed for governor, has said she would have to refuse to certify Joe Biden's win back in 2020 and has called for Arizona's top election official to be put in jail for her handling of the 2020 election. In the race for Senate, Trump-backed Blake Masters has echoed Trump's false claims about a stolen election, declaring in a campaign ad that Trump won the 2020 election. State Representative Mark Finch joining us now, Reginald Boulding, Democratic leader of the Arizona House of Representatives, and he is running as a Democrat for Arizona Secretary of State. So what are the dangers, in your view, of Arizona electing a 2020 election denier in the position of Secretary of State?
Look, first, thank you for having me. I mean, you laid out the facts. I mean, the reality is Mark Fincham is not just any election denier. He was on the steps January 6th. He's been subpoenaed by the January 6th committee to enact an insurrection, and now he wants to run our elections. You know, this race is going to be about someone that wants to run elections versus someone that wants to rig elections, and the whole entire country should be on high alert if Mark Fincham if he wins the Republican nomination, or if he has an opportunity to win Secretary of State office here in Arizona.
Do you think the fact that he actually went to the January 6th insurrection is significant in and of itself in terms of the continued normalization of political violence? Is that something that you think is a risk if the voters of your state decide to put him in power?
You know, it's one thing to just have went there, but Mark Fincham, he's someone that helped plan, he's someone that has helped organize, and someone that has continued to push this idea of a conspiracy theory and actively advocate for essentially the overthrowing of our elections. You know, Mark Fincham is a danger to the state of Arizona. He's a danger to the country. And if he is Secretary of State, he would put partisan politics over the Constitution here in Arizona. And that is crucial, especially with Arizona being a battleground state.
In terms of the harm for voters in your state, I mean, Secretary of State isn't a position, I think, that was on the mind of most everyday voters and everyday people in your state before 2020. But now I think people understand that, you know, that's somebody standing in the void protecting democracy. Does it matter? I'm so sorry, we're going to have to leave it there because we have Steve Kornacki with some breaking news on election results. So Reginald Boulding, thank you so much. Steve, what do you got?
We have a call in Kansas. NBC News now projecting that in the referendum to amend the state constitution to remove the right to abortion, no is going to win in Kansas tonight. Again, I was just on here a few minutes ago showing you we got those final results from a big county there that confirmed that early lead that no had taken just wasn't eroding that much as the same day vote came in. There's just enough vote in enough places right now that our decision desk feels confident in putting the check mark up there. No is going to win this thing tonight. This referendum to amend the state constitution is going to fail. Again, this is the first time that the question of abortion placed before the voters following that Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. It is taking place in a red state, a state that Donald Trump won by 15 points. But no is going to prevail tonight, and it looks like no is going to prevail handily tonight.
Is there any other election primary that is a parallel to this specific moment? I mean, it's post-Dobbs, and as you mentioned, this is the very first time that voters are going out in America and saying, yes or no to a question around abortion after it's been overruled. Do you think it's a trend? Do you think it signals that voters are very engaged on that question?
Well, I think, again, given the fact that this is taking place in Kansas, a red state, and given what is shaping up to be the margin here, I think this is something that's going to cause a recalibration, perhaps, in how both sides think about this, how to handle the post-Roe environment politically going forward. Because it's interesting, this exact same referendum was on 4 red state ballots over the last decade. But it was on those ballots when Roe v. Wade was still the law of the land. So that the referendums just didn't get this kind of attention. But in Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, and West Virginia, basically this exact same question, this exact same constitutional amendment was on the ballot in those states, and it passed in all of those states. And it was only close in one of those states, West Virginia. The margin there was 4 points. So it had gone 4 for 4 over the last decade before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Then Roe v. Wade was overturned, and now it pops up on the ballot in Kansas for the first time in this changed political atmosphere. And now no is going to win, and no is going to win by a very wide margin. So I think there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. I think especially on the pro-life side in terms of what they think the best way to proceed politically would be if they get this kind of rebuke in a state like Kansas. And as I mentioned, the other question here that I think now comes out of this, when you start looking, I'm just seeing if we're getting any more numbers. We are getting more numbers here. A place like Johnson County, biggest county in the state, huge, sprawling, suburban county, kind of place where Democrats have been doing better and better in recent years. There are a lot of counties like Johnson County all across the country. There are a lot of counties like Johnson County in big, important 2022 swing states, places like Pennsylvania, like Georgia, like Arizona. And Democrats have been saying since that Supreme Court ruling that this issue would galvanize voters specifically in places like Johnson County. We're certainly seeing that when it comes to this referendum tonight. What Democrats are also saying is that same energy and that same sentiment will attach itself to Democratic candidates in the midterm election in November, saying that they would protect the right to abortion and saying and arguing that Republicans wouldn't. I don't know if that's going to happen. That's been the Democratic argument, though, since the Supreme Court decision. And I think half of that Democratic argument, in terms of what the political fallout of this would be, is validated by this result. The half of the argument that says voters are going to be galvanized, especially in places like Johnson County. Now, whether the second part of the Democratic argument, that it attaches itself to Democratic candidates in November and makes a difference in the midterm election, that's a huge question now. That's something we're going to find out in the next 98 days. But yeah, this result here, again, we'll go back statewide, just see where it sits here, nearly 80% in here. I think this is going to have tremendous repercussions nationally, both in the midterm this year and in terms of the politics of abortion as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Steve Kornacki, for that helpful breakdown. To talk more about those repercussions, potentially, Jennifer Rubin, a Washington Post opinion columnist, also an MSNBC political analyst. So, Jennifer, what are you seeing? Do you think it's Republicans coming out to express, at least when it comes to the question that was on the ballot today about abortion in the state of Kansas, do you think that they are coming out to vote in support of abortion rights?
Well, it is a stunning result, and there simply are not enough Democrats to make up a margin of that magnitude in a state like Kansas. So some of the people who are voting no, that is to preserve abortion, it gets a little confusing, are voting for Republican candidates in other races. Obviously, the margin for those candidates in many cases is much smaller than it is for the no side, which has roughly a 25% lead. So that tells you that there are tons of Democrats, turnout was huge, some independents, and also some Republicans that simply don't want these kind of draconian bans that you're seeing pop up all over the country. And I could not agree with Steve Moore that this is going to have serious ramifications. As we are talking, the state of Indiana is now considering a draconian ban that would ban abortion from conception with very limited exceptions for rape and incest, has to be within the first trimester, and for a substantial risk to the woman's life. Are they going to go forward with that now, seeing that Kansas, a state that's arguably just as conservative, if not more so, has come out so strongly against it? And I think you're going to see this issue now reverberate in every single race up and down the ballot. Democrats have thought that this was an important issue. They've looked at the generic polling numbers close since Dobbs, and I think this will encourage them to bring this issue front and center and to make the midterms a referendum again on women's autonomy, women's rights, women's fundamental human desire to control their own lives. And I think the so-called pro-life, which really isn't pro-life forces, are going to be in for a surprise if they think that this position is going to sustain them in the long term.
I also want to bring in Cecile Richards into the conversation, former president of Planned Parenthood. And Cecile, what is your read on tonight's results? I want to remind everybody that we are talking about the red state of Kansas, and yet voters turned out in record numbers on this specific question post-Dobbs. How are you reading the results so far tonight, Cecile?
Well, it's an extraordinary victory, really. It's amazing. This is, and of course, the Republicans tried to rig this election, run it on a primary date where they didn't expect anyone to be voting. And instead, we've seen people waiting in line for hours to vote. This is, I think this shows exactly what we learned in the many years I was at Planned Parenthood, that if you put on the ballot the issue of whether or not people who are pregnant should make their decisions about their pregnancies, for politicians, overwhelmingly people will vote in favor of people who are pregnant. We saw this in South Dakota, we saw this in Colorado, we saw this in Mississippi. And so it doesn't surprise me in some ways that the people of Kansas have voted overwhelmingly to support the right of people to make decisions about their pregnancy and keep politicians out of their personal lives. But I think this has got to be a wake-up call for the Republican Party that has fought to outlaw abortion in this country. This is coming at them hard and fast. And these elections in November, I expect this is going to energize our voters. This is going to energize people who do not vote in midterm elections. And that, to me, would be the biggest wake up for this, what we're seeing tonight in Kansas, is that people who were not expected to vote came out in droves. And I expect they're going to be back for the midterm elections.
Cecile, just a quick follow-up. In terms of the turnout today, the reason why it's so fascinating to do a breakdown of it is because this is the first time post-Dobbs that abortion is actually on a ballot. So, political analysis, it doesn't trump what voters actually go out and do. How can other Democrats, other people running in this election who support the right to choose, how can they message around the issue given what we're seeing in Kansas? How would they look at these results tonight and utilize the message and take that to the voters in November?
Well, I honestly don't even think it's a messaging issue. I think it's a matter of saying, who do you trust to make decisions about their bodies and their pregnancies? Trust women. That's really all you need to know, is to trust women over politicians. And that's where the American people are. There has never been a better opportunity for candidates and elected officials who support the right to make your own decisions about your body, support personal freedoms, to say that and put the Republicans on defense. They are way out of line. They are way out of line of where the American people are. And if they're out of line in Kansas, you can imagine they are in every single state where there are competitive races this November. This is a wake-up call as big as we could possibly imagine. And I really want to thank the voters of Kansas for making this very clear. This country does not want to take away the right to safe and legal abortion.
Jennifer, do you think that could be because of some of the stories that we've been reading just in the last couple of weeks? I mentioned earlier the woman in Texas who carried her dead fetus inside of her for 2 weeks because of the Texas's ban on abortion post-Dobbs. Speak to those unintended consequences and that wake-up call that Cecile is talking about. Did the anti-abortion movement perhaps underestimate the backlash that they would receive after Dobbs?
I actually don't think it was unintended. This is exactly what they think of women. This is exactly what they think of abortion. The Supreme Court put no value whatsoever on women's fundamental rights, on their health, on their lives. And this is the natural consequence of what they did. And I think these stories have been arresting, have been deeply disturbing. But more important than a specific case here or there, they have sustained a conversation among women, among men, people who normally would not be discussing this issue or maybe not discussing politics at all. And now they are looking at this and they're having this conversation. Are politicians going to force someone to remain pregnant and force them to give birth? This sounds like something out of communist China. And in a sense, it is. It's tyranny. So I also think, following up on what Cecile said, it's not only national Republicans who are out of touch, all those state lawmakers who have been passing these bans and the governors who have been signing it, they are completely out of touch with the people in their state. And those people, many of them, are going to be on the ballot as well. And Democrats are certainly going to point out that state lawmakers, governors, all sorts of people up and down the ballot have been promising to enforce these draconian laws. You have prosecutors, you have the Attorney General of Indiana who is going to go after a doctor who performed an abortion for a 10-year-old rape victim. So all of these people are going to be accountable. They're going to face the voters. And this is real. This is not now hypothetical. They may wax lyrically about a future person that is yet to be born, but we are looking at born people. We are looking at women who have real lives and real interests in maintaining their freedom. And I think I cannot express how far this exceeds expectations that people in the pro-choice community had. This is Kansas. And I think if you had talked to people yesterday, you would have said many people would have been looking just to see if it was close and to say, well, if it's this close in Kansas, look what it could be in another state. Instead, it's winning by 25 points. That's almost unheard of. And if you want a unifying issue for Americans, we're supposedly divided on everything. Democrats and Republicans can't agree on anything. Well, over 60% of Kansans agree on pro-choice initiatives. So I think this is going to be important for every office for judges who are on the ballot in many states, state Supreme Court justices. And I think we are going to see a real revolution and a real uprising. I think the Republicans maybe expected everyone to roll over and kind of just give up, throw up their hands because the Supreme Court said there is no right to abortion, so there's no right to abortion. That was the opening bell. And now I think you're seeing the real force of the American public come through. And I will add that the reason you see this so strongly and you don't see the same results in state legislatures and governors who are passing these is because we do not have voting rights in this country. Those state legislators are in districts that are meant to curtail voting, that curtail the rights of the poor and people of color. And so they don't reflect the views of the people they are supposed to be representing. So I think this is a big wake-up call for pro-choice forces and a big wake-up call for democracy. And if people aren't representing your interests, you kick them out and you get people who are.
So fascinating. Jen Rubin and Cecile Richards, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please stay safe. Let's get right into our panel of political professionals, really a power panel. Republican strategist Susan Del Percio, also Celinda Lake, a Democratic pollster and president of Lake Research Partners, and Cornell Belcher, a Democratic pollster and president of Brilliant Corners Research. So Celinda, what are your top takeaways from tonight's results? This is pretty surprising, even to me. How are you seeing things?
Well, I think we just got the answer to the contours of the 2022 elections. And we've been saying that the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the right to people to make their own personal health care decisions is on the ballot in November. And the voters of Kansas not the voters of Manhattan, the voters of Kansas pointed that out. And we see two problems that the progressives and Democrats had in the election. We were wondering how we were going to motivate voters, and we were wondering how we were going to get suburban women. And we just got the answer out of Kansas, which is Roe v. Wade is on the ballot, and the politicians have gone too far. Women are not going to accept women and doctors and nurses being jailed. They're not going to accept politicians interfering in their personal health care decisions. They're not going to accept birth control being banned. They're not going to accept miscarriages being investigated. This is the Democratic and progressive answer to the 2022 elections.
Susan, what is your read on tonight's results? We've talked in recent weeks since the Dobbs decision so many times about potentially abortion being utilized by Democrats to galvanize people who support choice. What is your read on the bright red state of Kansas having record turnout on a referendum, the first vote on the issue of abortion after the Supreme Court overturned it? It's so fascinating to see in real time the American public reacting to the overturning of Roe on the ballot.
They are reacting, but it's important to recognize that right now that was the primary issue on the ballot. And it'd be a little bit of a mistake to go in the direction where I think Jennifer Rubin said earlier, to assume that 60% of Kansans are pro-choice. It's that they are against extremism. That's the key thing to take away from here, is that the Republican extremism of putting such a referendum on the ballot was rejected. What I'm going to be looking for is that data-driven narrative that tells me how much of an increase in young people were there, because that's going to be important come 2022. What was the suburban turnout looking like? How many Republican women supported this, not because they're overwhelmingly pro-choice, but they do believe there should be some option and that this extremism cannot be accepted. So I think this is an important thing. I think it's going to be a key motivator to get people to the polls, but I still do not think come 2022, it will be the top issue on the ballot.
And Cornell, one of the things Susan said that is important to note is that you can't assume that a voter that's coming in to vote no is pro-choice. Perhaps they have a nuanced take and are even personally pro-life. But is that important in your view? Do you think that voters are coming out and having that type of nuance when they're thinking about this issue? Or do you think some voters think they're pro-life when they actually are pro-choice, given the fact that they're landing on the no vote, saying that women should have options, people who can get pregnant should have these options?
No, I think there's a number of variables at work here. I do think when you look at that result, and quite frankly, when you look at other polling data, I'm fascinated. I look at church frequency a lot in my polling data, more so than as a evangelical. But those who are frequently going to church, like if you're going to church 2 or 3 times a week, that says something about your religiosity. And overwhelmingly, you're seeing frequent church voters, churchgoers, are not for the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I think there's a nuance here. There's a conversation here about extremism. There's a conversation about going too far. I think in some voters' minds, they cannot be so for abortion, but they can also not be for this sort of extremism that's sort of taking away rights from women, and women ended up getting hurt. I also think, I've got to lean in to what Celinda says here, that this is a motivator, right? We Democrats need a dynamic, changing variable in order for us to overcome history. And I will remind people that Bush overcame history in his midterm. And it wasn't about talking about the economy. The economy was the #1 issue actually going into that election as well. And you know what the Bush White House talked about? They talked about national security. They actually drove an issue that was benefiting Republicans. If Democrats don't drive this issue of extremism and a woman's right and choices, and they, I know a lot of our progressives want to talk about economy all the time. The economy is important, but we'd be foolish not to drive an issue like this that clearly benefits us and clearly mobilizes our voters.
You know, I think the
Some
other thing
strategists
is
would argue that abortion is an economic issue. So, Linda, jump in right quick before we go to a break.
I think it's about all of our freedoms too. There's a slippery slope here. First, it's abortion, then it's LGBTQ rights, then it's voting rights, and voters are rejecting this whole trajectory.
Important point about the slippery slope there. Susan Del Percio, Celinda Lake, and Cornell Belcher, thank you so much for being here and breaking it down for us. Please stay safe. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this with some breaking news. I want to go back to Steve Kornacki right now for a race involving Donald Trump and January 6th. Steve?
Yeah, this one has been heating up here. This is the 3rd Congressional District, Western Michigan, based in Grand Rapids. Peter Meijer, one of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump after January 6th, being challenged by a Trump-backed opponent here, John Gibbs. Gibbs jumped out to an early lead, but you can see now with nearly 60% of the vote in, Meijer just in the last minute has taken a very slight lead. It's only 515 votes. The chunk of vote, the biggest chunk of vote to come is in Kent County. That's where Grand Rapids is. That is Meijer's base. Meijer has, with 60%, almost 60% of the vote in, Peter Meijer has a chance of surviving this primary. It'd be the first time we've seen a House Republican who voted to endorse Trump. If he could win this, it'd be the first time he holds on against a Trump-backed challenger. A lot of suspense here, long way to go, but Meijer absolutely in this game, and that alone is a bit of a surprise.
Really, really interesting, Steve. Thank you for that update. We do have some breaking news. ABC News is reporting that a federal grand jury investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol has subpoenaed Pat Cipollone, who served as Donald Trump's White House counsel. Joining us now, Hugo Lowell, a congressional correspondent and reporter for The Guardian. So, Hugo, what is the latest on this investigation and the news that Pat Cipollone is now going to have to testify before the grand jury?
Yeah, it's really significant. I mean, the idea that Trump's former White House counsel, who was in the West Wing on January 6th and knew and told the former president that his plans to overturn the election was illegal, had going before the federal grand jury in Washington to testify about a January 6th investigation is really, really big news. I mean, we heard last week, Zarlina, that Mark Short and Greg Jacob, two top aides to the former vice president, also spoke and also testified before the federal grand jury. But the fact that we are now taking West Wing officials, people who were top counsels to the president, and having them testify to the grand jury, I think is a new step, a new escalation, and really shows that the DOJ has actually penetrated the inner circle now of the former president.
We only have one more minute here, but the committee has been going methodically through the multi-pronged attempt to overturn the election. And even throughout the course of their hearings, Pat Cipollone did come and testify. Do you think there are other folks that are around the president that we may not even know about that may come up in headlines because they've been subpoenaed going forward?
I think that's a safe assumption. I think if, Mark Short, the chief of staff of Mike Pence, and the White House counsel is now testifying to the grand jury, there must be dozens of other top White House officials who have been subpoenaed that we just don't know of yet. I think interesting to note with Pat Cipollone, the White House, the Biden White House, declined to waive executive privilege for him when he went before the select committee. Now that he's being interviewed as part of a criminal investigation, I think it's also safe to assume that White House counsel's office will also waive privilege in this instance. And if that's the case, then Pat Cipollone will have a free slate, a blank slate to talk about anything with respect to Trump and January 6th and everything that went on in the West Wing. So I think this criminal investigation is only hotting up.
So fascinating, this breaking news, because I want to remind the folks at home that Pat Cipollone is the one that said that we're going to be charged with every crime imaginable if we go up to the Capitol. So he's got a lot to say to this federal grand jury. Hugo Lowell, thank you so much for that update on the breaking news. That is tonight's last word. Steve Kornacki will be here with results throughout the course of the night as MSNBC's primary night coverage continues. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts right now.